Former President Trump said in the last debate that you believe abortion, quote, in the 9th month is absolutely fine. Yes or no? Is that what you support? I'll give you 2 minutes.
That's not what the bill says.
This legislature at this moment in time is debating whether or not we want to perform abortions on children in utero until the moment before birth. I want that to sink in. That is extreme.
It is law.
Wait. Right? So we're hearing the debate on the floor. Representative Hudson, were you there for that debate?
I was, and it took place on literally the 10th day of the legislative session. So those of us who were first-term members, this was quite literally the most important legislation ever considered by any legislative body in the state of Minnesota, and they sprung it on a very large freshman class at the earliest possible opportunity in order to take us off of our game, and it was as reprehensible as you just saw there in that clip. It basically creates a space of anarchy within prenatal care, where the one part of our society where we're going to manifest this kind of Ayn Rand utopia where government has nothing to say about anything is whether or not we protect the lives of the unborn. In every other area of life, other than gender-affirming care, we're going to have extensive government involvement and regulation and taxation dictating every aspect of how you conduct yourself in the state of Minnesota.
Yes, I mean, you don't have to believe what Walz said or what we're saying. You can look at the language of the bill here yourself. If you look under partway through here, subdivision 3, reproductive freedom, it says every individual has a fundamental right to make autonomous decisions about the individual's own reproductive health, including the fundamental right to use or refuse reproductive health care. And if you want to glance the paragraph above, it expresses all the things that might fall under that umbrella of reproductive health care. With this, it's not so much what the bill says, it's what it does not say. There are no exemptions. There are no limitations. It talks about an individual, so that could be a male or a female. Which of any age. There's no minimum age requirement for this at all. There's no specific limitations or requirements regarding minors. There's no limitation about this age or stage of the baby in utero. So this bill does literally legalize abortion for any reason, for any individual, all the way up until the moment of birth. That's the truth. Tim Walz lied. He is the one that signed this into law. So he does support abortion in the 9th month.
The rhetorical trick that Tim Walz played in the vice presidential debate was assuming that you're too dumb to understand how legislation actually works. The fact of the matter, what's important is not what the specific language of a bill says, but what the impact of that language is going to be in the context of all other statute. And this wasn't the only pro-abortion bill that they passed. They also incorporated a bill numbered HF 94 into their healthcare omnibus bill. And what that did is it repealed all of the previously existing pro-life legislation, such as the Infant Born Alive Protection Act, which insisted upon providing life-saving care to infants who are born alive after a botched abortion. And so the impact of those two provisions taken together is absolutely that it is legal in the state of Minnesota to allow a newborn infant to die as a result of negligence and exposure on a medical table, and there's absolutely nothing that the state of Minnesota will do to either prevent that or to prosecute the folks who are responsible after the fact. And so when Tim Walz says that's not what the bill says, he's being too cute by more than half, because that's what the bill does. That's what the laws he signed over this past 2 years actually affects, is the murder of both unborn and born children. We still have, even in existing state law here in Minnesota, recognition of the personhood of unborn children. If you look at our criminal statutes in Chapter 609, there are existing crimes for murder of the unborn, assault upon the unborn, manslaughter of the unborn. And part of her bill was including an exception to each of those crimes in the event that the mother decides that her child no longer has those civil rights. That's the status quo here in Minnesota.
Former President Trump said in the last debate that you believe abortion, quote, in the 9th month is absolutely fine. Yes or no? Is that what you support? I'll give you 2 minutes.
That's not what the bill says. And maybe you're free to disagree with me on this and explain this to me. But as I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think, whether you're pro-choice or pro-abortion, that is fundamentally barbaric.
Yes, Governor, please respond.
Look, this is one where there's always something there. This is a very simple proposition. These are women's decisions to make about their healthcare decisions, and the physicians who know best when they need to do this. Trying to distort the way a law is written to try and make a point, that's not it at all.
What was I wrong about, Governor? Please tell me, what was I wrong about?
That is not the way the law is written. Look.
Why the changes to the Infant Born Alive Protection Act? Why remove the references to abortion so that it applies to any infant that's born alive? And why remove the language requiring preserving life and health of the infant?
These laws that were passed really, I would say, to make abortion more difficult and more expensive, and to demonize doctors, to give the false impression that anyone delivers a child alive and then just lets it die. That just doesn't happen. That's not how abortion care works.
Well, you know why we know you're wrong? Because there's a report that tells us that just last year, 5 babies were born alive.
So here's the language that the whole nation needs to see. You know, when Walz, first of all, he flat out denied that this is what the bill does, but this is what the bill does. It legalizes infanticide. And it's not so much what the bill says, it's what it doesn't say. And it's the language they intentionally deleted. So pay attention to the struck through language. First, you can notice it used to say a born alive infant as a result of an abortion. They've struck that language out and changed it to an infant who is born alive. So this literally applies to any baby who is born alive, not just as a result of after an abortion attempt. And then towards the end, here's the language they struck out: to preserve the life and health of the born alive infant. They struck out the language about care that would protect the baby's life and health, and they simply replaced it with care for the infant who's born alive. So now medical providers have no legal obligation to provide care that protects the baby's life and health. That it's legalizing infanticide.
All right, so Representative Hudson, you were on the floor during this debate. We saw the clip of Democrat Tina Liebling saying this is all just to create some scenario that doesn't happen.
And by the way, we're not going to know the numbers going forward, because part of what they did with the abortion provisions that Governor Walz signed into law is they're removing any reporting. So we're just not going to know how many abortions are taking place in the state of Minnesota, the circumstances of those abortions, or how many babies are being born alive and left to die. And as Karin rightly points out, the thing to look at is the language that they struck out and the language that they replaced it with. Previously, it said that infants born alive as a result of an abortion attempt need to be provided life-saving care. In other words, care, the object of which is to preserve the life of that infant. They replaced that with the word care. Now, care could mean literally anything. Care could mean patting the newborn infant on the head and saying they're there as you watch them expire on the medical table. It provides no obligation whatsoever to actually prioritize the life of that newborn human child who is expiring before your eyes in a medical setting. It's absolutely abhorrent.
I hope our viewers understand what's happening here. One, the frighteningly smooth demeanor in which this vice presidential candidate just covered up, ignored what is honest here. Okay, if it's such an okay deal that you all wanted to pass it, that these Democrats thought was I'm assuming a lot of Democrats were for this bill. I don't know if it was party line or not. Why won't they own up to it? If they thought it's so valiant, it's between a woman and her doctor, which we know when you're in the abortion clinic, you don't even see a doctor until the procedure is coming up. It is one after the other. There is not really a lot of consultation there, let's be honest. So,
Tamara, you are right over the target. That is the question to ask, is through this entire legislative process, and again, all of this stuff is on the record. You can go watch the videos that the official House and Senate media organizations post to YouTube, and you can watch these debates both in committee and on the respective floors of both the state Senate and the state House. They did not hold anything back in terms of articulating what their intention was here. And so the question does become, if this is a moral good, if it is a moral good to end the life of unborn children or indeed newborn infants who are born alive after a botched abortion, why are you running away from that? Why are you denying the reality of what the laws that you signed into law actually produces and actually affects? And the answer, I think, is very obvious and very encouraging. They know that this is morally abhorrent. They know that what they did is evil. They know that what was signed into law and passed, indeed, on party line votes over the last 2 years in regards to the care for the unborn and the born is out of sync with where the voters of the state of Minnesota and the residents of the state of Minnesota are at. They know it is politically unpalatable, and they're walking it back now because they know that they cannot allow themselves to be held politically responsible for the actual effect of the laws that they passed and that Tim Walz signed.
well said, Representative. I'm talking with Representative Walter Hudson, Minnesota State House. Karin Miller, thank you for writing this article on Substack. Everybody can go there and find it. As I said, I was surprised at how sharp this nominee was in retracting or debating or deflecting. But if he truly thinks that they did not, that they don't have babies dying, that that's not in the bill, maybe he's not so sharp. Maybe he's showing signs of the president we have in the White House right now.
Well, I think that's giving him too much credit. The more I've interacted with Democrats at the state legislature, the more certain I am that they are not stupid. They are not dumb. I don't even really think they're incompetent. I think that's giving them way too much credit. What they are is fully bought into a worldview which devalues human life and furthers the moral deficit that, ironically, they often complain about. So you go back to our nation's history, we've had this conversation before. We had it around the issue of chattel slavery. You go and you look at the debates between Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas, and what he advocated for, the latter, Stephen Douglas, is he advocated for what he called popular sovereignty as an argument for expanding slavery into the new U.S. territories. And today, the left calls that democracy. And it's the idea that what the people want, the people should get, regardless of what it is. It's the antithesis of a republic, which in a republic, which we have, a constitutional republic, you have the rights of individuals enshrined that no majority can tread upon. And that's not what Democrats fundamentally believe. And even as they try to deflect and dodge and walk back the impact of the legislation that they passed and signed, they also disclose their underlying rationale for why they truly believe that this is what the law of the land should be. And Tim Walz would like to see it national. And that is the repeated talking point that a mother ought to be able to decide whether or not her child is a human being. A mother ought to be able to decide whether or not her child has civil rights. And again, I point to our criminal statutes here in Minnesota, Chapter 609, where we recognize the personhood of an unborn child at conception. In the law that we have protecting babies from murder, assault, and manslaughter, there's a definition of what an unborn child is. And it's a child that has been conceived but not yet born. So in current Minnesota state law, we recognize conception as the moment at which a human being is due civil rights protection. The laws signed by Tim Walz undermined that and canceled that on the arbitrary whim of the mother to decide whether or not her child is a human due civil right. So we have provided in this state the ability of exclusively mothers to decide whether or not human beings have civil rights. It is as abhorrent as any human rights violation that the left likes to pretend to care about from hundreds of years ago, and is ongoing and being furthered by their side today.
So what's even more frightening to me is that though that's on your books, they then turn around and say, yeah, but you can let the baby die. They're admitting it's a life at conception. We're not arguing over that anymore. But mom can decide if she doesn't want baby, and baby can die. Wow.
Yes, it is exactly in statute. It says it recognizes the unborn human is the offspring of a human conceived but not yet born. And that's in our Minnesota statute that applies to all criminal law. The only exception to that is abortion, unfortunately. And now you see with the expanded abortion laws up to the moment of birth and beyond. And my greatest concern in this is, false words are going to lead to misinformed votes. And here we have my governor, who's the VP on the VP ticket, in a national publicly televised debate lying about abortion policy that he signed into law. So my exhortation for everyone who hears this is, if you know the truth, share the truth. We have to get out the truth to the voters.
Donald Trump was telling the truth. Lindsay Davis scolded him. She was the one who was totally wrong. And then in the vice presidential debate, it was Walz who was flat out misleading voters and viewers.
So yes, everyone needs to know the truth of what's happening with abortion in Minnesota, because if Harris and Walz are elected, it is the reality that will be brought across, that will sweep across our entire nation. So I have some photos here that I've shared of the 2024 March for Life from Minnesota. So if we could first put up the one that has the arch. So you can see this is an arch through the Minnesota State Capitol. You can see a portion of the thousands of people who came. And down at the bottom, you can see some red fabric with, this is 12,175 baby models. Thank you. Perfect photo. If you could stay there for a moment. So this display is 50 feet wide, 6 feet deep, holding 12,175 baby models to represent the babies, the lives who were aborted in Minnesota in 2022. And we had this display at the Minnesota March for Life. After we had it in front of the steps, we had volunteers carry each segment into the rotunda. So if you could show the rotunda photo. So that's the center of our rotunda floor with the North Star with 8 points. So this is a pile of 1,500 baby models representing the babies aborted in a year in Minnesota in 2022. Now, if you could go to the closer up photo of one of the piles. So this is 1,500 babies. And you have to know that this is proportional for gestational age. So the larger size is accurate, and also it's proportional for ethnicity. There's a disproportionate number of babies of color who are aborted across the nation. And this is 1,500. We don't, as Walter Hudson pointed out, we will not know. They changed the law, so we will not know the number of babies aborted in 2023 until after November 5th, until December. But Minnesota Citizens Concerned for Life, from their calculations, they know the number has gone up to at least 17,000 abortions, from 12,000 to 17,000 in 2023. So that pile, that mound there of babies, that would be the number of babies aborted in 1 month in Minnesota. And those are just from the reports that we know of. The truth is likely far worse. So this is the image, the reality, the truth that every voter across the nation needs to know. If you don't want abortion up until the moment of birth and legalize infanticide for any reason across the nation, you need to vote no to Harris and Walz and support Trump and Vance. Thank you.
Wow. Representative Hudson, any comments?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you look at that visual, it's just so striking for a wide variety of reasons. But one of the reasons is, of course, the racial disparities, which we are consistently told by the left is prima facie evidence for systemic racism. Now, I do not subscribe to their worldview. I do not subscribe to critical race theory. I do not subscribe to the obviously logically fallacious idea that any given disparity necessarily means that there's a systemic racism in place against a minority community. But applying their own rules to their conduct, if we insist upon them living by the rules that they've set, then very clearly their abortion policy is an obvious manifestation of the very systemic racism that they claim is such a bane on society that we have to take our children in our public schools and teach them to regard each other with suspicion based upon the color of their skin. And so there's a complete inconsistency in the political narrative on the left. And this is something that we should not allow to go unhighlighted, that if in fact they believe they have to be held accountable for their own premises. If their premise is that disparate impact is evidence of systemic racism, then there may be no greater evidence of that or more greater manifestation of that than the status quo that Tim Walz signed into law and that Democrats have long supported around the killing of the unborn.
Well said. Both of you very articulate on this debate. Thank you so much for bringing this to our attention. You guys did a very nice, clear job of explaining what we saw on video from Walz, what you had on video from the House, State House in Minnesota, what is on paper versus what is coming out his mouth. Frightening. It's frightening if people will understand what's really happening there. The march you had at the Capitol is encouraging because we all think that Minnesota is this blue state at this point, a very deep, ugly blue state in some very concerning areas as far as I said, the mutilation of children, life, just the disrespect for the Constitution. But you're not. When I look at that photo of thousands of people in front of your Capitol, you are not blue. It's just maybe a couple of different areas near your bigger cities or the way the election worked in the Senate. I know you've got a majority by one. Is that the deal now in the Senate? How many, what's the majority number in the Senate?
It's a one-member majority in the Senate, 34-33, and that was the case over the course of the last 2 years. And it's very noteworthy is that they took what were actually very slim electoral victories in 2022, and they used them in order to move forward with the most radical left-wing agenda imaginable, as if they had some sort of broad electoral mandate. And you're absolutely right. I firmly maintain that Minnesota is not a blue state. We had in each House district between 2,500 and 3,500 conservative voters not participate in the 2022 election. And when you go around and you talk to folks in this state, they do not agree with the policies, including the ones we've discussed today, that have been passed and signed into law by Tim Walz. The analogy I like to use is that the harvest is up, the corn is tall. Well, we need our workers to go out and bring in the political harvest, and we can easily flip this state red.
It is time for us to be a little bit more bold with the truth, because there are no limits from those who are willing to lie about the truth. There are no limits of what they won't stoop to. I'm going to give both of you like the last minute to say whatever you'd like to our viewers. I want to thank you both for coming on. I want to thank you, Representative Hudson, for standing strong in the House in Minnesota, for being willing to come on and talk about this when someone is flat out, it appears, flat out intentionally deceiving viewers and voters. Somebody has to have the courage to stand up and say not the way it is. Thank you. And so I'll give you this moment to just leave some parting words with our viewers.
Well, it's not some sort of personal courage that I'm exhibiting right now or on the floor. What it is it's an outward expression of my faith in my Lord Jesus Christ and recognition of the fact that what we are experiencing today is a continuation and a furtherance of the biblical narrative that we all have access to through the Word, through the Scripture. You go through and you read the Bible from cover to cover, and you see example after example after example of precisely this: evil trying to snuff out the light in the world, and God, to the glory of His name, inserting Himself and setting things right time and time again. And He can and will do that now this year, 2024, in this time, he's still on the throne. He's still in charge. And what he asks of us is to live faithfully and to speak the truth. And regardless of the outcome, I often think about the poor guy who was born 200 years into the 400 captivity in Egypt. What was his commission? What was his job? Well, it was to live faithfully in spite of his circumstances. And that's exactly the same mission that we have today. We need to do what we've been commanded to by our God, by our Lord Jesus. Speak the truth, advocate for righteousness, and then leave the outcome up to God. And that's always going to work out for the good. We know that.
So well said. And I started to disagree with you on it being courage or not courage, but I love what you're saying, something very similar to something I say. It's not that I'm bold, I'm obedient. I just try to be obedient. Karin, anything you'd like to say to our viewers before you go? And thank you again for that article.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So, we pray and we look to God to, turn our country around or save our country, but he looks to us to take action. We are his hands and feet. Unfortunately, only 25% of evangelical Christians vote. But the reality is, if we can flip that statistic, if the majority of people of faith show up at the polls and vote their values, we can change the trajectory of our states and of our nation. So that's my final exhortation. People of faith, pray. Everyone look at the policies, look at the bills, look at what Biden and Harris have done under their administration. Look at what Trump did under his administration. Look at what Walz passed into law. I do have a Legislative Impact 2324 article on my Substack. What he passed into law is what's coming to the nation if he's elected. So look at their policies and then pray and vote your values. Thank you.